My name is Connor Wienberg. I graduated from NAU in May 2014. I am a Indigo Analyst, and I studied finance and business economics. I started a week after I graduated, so pretty much I graduated, and then a couple days after I came down looking for apartments. And since it's 1 year, I'll end at about the same time. So with private equity, essentially we have a fund of money from a bunch of limited partners, and we use that fund to then we'll outright acquire a company. A lot of international companies, there's foreign ownership restrictions. So typically they'll limit you to either 25% or 49%. We prefer to have majority ownership so we can actually control the company. But sometimes you don't have that opportunity. Well, our duties are pretty broad, so we'll do a lot of research legwork for the firm. So typically our whole deal process will be sort of assigned to a deal, and then one of us will do an initial diligence task on it. So I'll write up a review of the company, give a recommendation on if we should proceed with it or not. From there, do a lot of financial modeling, do maybe putting together a term sheet. So I'll work with a lot of guys in the office to come up with specific terms for a deal, identify key questions for a deal. So what are the risks going to be? Put together diligence decks on it, really just organize the whole diligence process, and then eventually we'll ask for opinions a lot of the time in this boardroom here. So we'll all come and sit down with, it's essentially our investor committee, and what'll happen a lot is Bill will ask one of the analysts first, what are your thoughts? So we're expected to have a comprehensive answer on how we think a deal should progress, or if we think it's a good idea or not. Other side of that is we currently have the three airlines for our portfolio companies, Wizz, Frontier, and Volaris. So we'll work a lot with the management teams on any sort of tasks. So it might be for Volaris, I know Ryan spent a couple weeks in Mexico working on revenue systems and revenue strategies. I've done some fleet work with Frontier, so we'll work with their management and build a fleet plan for them. Definitely a steep learning curve, especially for the airline industry, because it's not something that you really think of from, I think, the not a consumer standpoint, because everybody has flown probably, but there's a lot of industry terms, and you have to look at investments a lot differently as well for private equity. So like when I was at NAU, I did mostly capital markets, so publicly traded companies looking at stocks. So now we're looking at a lot of companies that maybe they're not listed somewhere. They could be in Central Asia, Africa, literally anywhere in the world we'll look at a company. And so a lot of the time finding any sort of information on companies like that can be extremely difficult. Probably work 55, 60 hours a week, which isn't nearly as bad as what a lot of other finance jobs could be. So actually we're pretty lucky in that regard. But then you're always available, so I'm constantly available on the phone. Weekends, I'll work. Once you come into the company, you're expected to start working on your GMAT if you haven't already. So we also have to take a GMAT prep course. That was part of my hiring agreement. Yeah, so it's in the contract that I would sign up for one. So I did that on weekends, and then I did first attempt in August, I think. Didn't get the score I wanted, did another one in December. So the plan right now is Cornell. I had an interview with them. They had a couple reservations, one being work experience. So currently in talks and waiting to hear back from them. Other choices, I'm looking at University of Washington or University of Colorado. One point that's maybe a little more useful for underclassmen is GPAs. Some people think aren't important, but if you're going to go to a grad school and if you're coming from a public university, you have to have a high GPA. Typically, we want to see at least like a 3.8 if you're going to come work at Indigo. The average for GPA for grad school is about like 3.4, 3.3, but on the flip side, they're looking at people coming from places like Princeton or Harvard, an Ivy League school, where if you have a 3.3 or something, then okay. So you came from an Ivy League. But if you're coming from a public university, not in NAU, any ASU, any state school, you have to have that high GPA. So care about your classes. The GMAT also incredibly important, especially for those are really the first numbers that they can screen applicants against. So the hardest grad school to get into is Stanford. So they take 7% of their applicants. Their average GMAT score is a 729, I think, which is I want to say 97th percentile or something like that. Yeah. So if you're going to do the GMAT, really commit to it. And another part of that is they look at that for scholarships a lot as well. Average work experience for a MBA applicant is 5 years. So with going in with only 1 year can make it tough, but at the same time, a lot of people, so like one of them's at Yale, we have a student at Cornell, he's a third-year law student there now. They say the stuff they learn in Indigo compared to what people have learned elsewhere, it's not very comparable, and Indigo's just way above it. It definitely prepares us for post-Indigo work. You often hear from the old interns that are actually out in the real world now, or post-Indigo real world, that the level, like the quality of analyst work you do here compared to a lot of their colleagues is totally different. This is a way higher standard. Previous interns have gone all over the place, and maybe you're traveling every month. But for me, I spent a week in London. We fly out to Denver pretty often for Frontier board meetings. That's actually where everybody is today. But London's been the only international travel for me. I've probably looked at 40 by now, if not more. And depending on the company, I mean, it depends on how far we actually look at them before we realize there's not a deal. But yeah, we look at a lot, and it sort of goes in waves. So sometimes there might be nothing for a couple weeks, and we'll just either work on an old deal that we've had in the works for a while, or something for the portfolio companies. But then sometimes maybe we get emails from people and we're looking at 6 companies in a week or something. I'd say as soon as you take the job, really jump in to the work and fully commit yourself to learning as much as you can, as quickly as you can, and try to be as involved in everything that's going on in the office as possible. So if you have nothing going on, go and ask, seek somebody out to find something out. Another one is don't be afraid to ask questions to anybody, especially our direct supervisor, Andrew Broderick. Very helpful guy. He always constantly encourages us to come into his office to ask him anything. And I think coming in, you don't want to come off as being inexperienced and unknowledgeable. So you're sort of shy about going in to ask questions all the time. But they fully expect, they know the situation, so they know that you're not really going to have all the answers. So always go in, and no matter how dumb you might think it is, go and ask them about it. Yeah, private equity is incredibly difficult to get into. It's a very small industry. It's a very selective industry. Most often the path that people will take to go to private equity is you go work on Wall Street for 3 years or something, and then you go to a top MBA program. Then, if you're lucky, out of the MBA program, then you can get into private equity. If not, then you go back to working in an investment bank. And when you're working in an investment bank as an analyst for those first few years, you're working 100 hours a week. You're a slave to the company. So, being able to get into private equity post-graduation is very rare. And so finding an opportunity like this, you have to take full advantage of it. Mr. Franke, Bill Franke, he's been great. His office is right around the corner from ours, so always open for questions that we have to ask him. He'll come over and he'll chat with us about grad school or whatever work's going on, and always encourages us to, put out the best work we can. He's a fountain of knowledge that he's open to sharing with and open to talk with, so great guy.